Well, I was an AI policy researcher 4 years ago in my first rework conference, but now I'm head of research and advisory. So yes, I'm Yolanda Lannquist, and I work at the Future Society, which is a nonprofit originally incubated at Harvard Kennedy School. And our mission is to advance the responsible adoption of AI and emerging technologies for the benefit of humanity. And we have a lot of different program areas, but the one I'll be speaking with you about today is our program called Responsible AI for Development, which is building the capacity and tools and knowledge for policymakers and different sectoral leaders to lead responsible and inclusive AI adoption in developing country contexts. So when I spoke 4 years ago, it was very broadly about AI ethics, but now the field we've been trying to move it forward, so we're moving from practices to implementation. So we're helping policymakers directly in mostly African countries right now. But we'd love to speak with you and hear from you after this as well. So a little bit about the program before I dive into the activities and findings. So the Future Society is leading the co-development of 3 national AI strategies in Africa right now with the public sector ministries and with GIZ. This builds on our work with the World Bank Digital Development Team in a report called Harnessing AI for Development, which looked at 19 countries' national AI strategies. And we also work with the OECD AI Policy Observatory, where I and 3 other colleagues from the Future Society are appointed experts, with the Global Partnership on AI, and with many nonprofits, companies, different governments. And so we hope to meet you as well. And I also led AI for Sustainable Development at Internet Governance Forum, and my colleagues have led participatory workshops, for example, in responsible AI in the banking sector in Africa for Société Générale's Francophone countries. And then on the left here was just an event at the Mo Ibrahim Foundation in Africa's annual summit on responsible AI for development in Africa with colleagues from GIZ, the UN, Smart Africa, and Carnegie Mellon University Africa. So now I'm going to get into the exciting part of our work. So we know that there are many applications and use cases for AI across the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And actually the AI for Good Global Summit in Geneva in the past, now virtually, is a great place to learn about a lot of those practical AI for good projects going on and share learnings, as well as climate change AI and many others, and the Global Partnership on AI seeks to support as well. And so this could be anything from analyzing satellite and aerial imagery to predict deforestation or crop outcomes or disaster relief, for example, and many others in healthcare, education, climate, and more. So just a sectoral example on AI in healthcare in Africa. What are some of the existing applications already being piloted? Everything from diagnostic tools to differentiate COVID-19, to chatbots, to detection of mosquito breeding sites in aerial images, to drones that deliver blood supplies like Zipline does in Rwanda, and many, many others. Especially in regions that are under-resourced in terms of nurses and doctors and medical supplies. We can hope that AI can increase access to quality healthcare. But there are a lot of practical applications for AI, and this list is by no means limited to the healthcare sector or to African countries, or even to developing countries generally. There are a lot of practical challenges, like insufficient amounts of accurate, up-to-date, or complete and representative data, low digital skills, a digital literacy, particularly in rural areas, and we can think about gender divides and other kinds of divides on that as well, gaps in digital infrastructure and internet coverage, lower accuracy of AI models that are trained on foreign data that are not representative in local contexts, or even data sources like ImageNet. limited talent pool with practical experience that's ready to engage in projects in AI, the need for more coordination in data regulation across sectors, and need for more governance, regulation, data privacy, cybersecurity, data governance, and in some cases, in some countries, lack of trust. So, and again, another slide that is interesting. I presented a very similar version in 2018 because we're still trying to balance the opportunities of AI with the risks. So the opportunities I mentioned can also include economic growth. So many countries are interested in how AI can help them to be more competitive economically and support their key sectors, industry, for example, and productivity gains to support access to healthcare and education, sustainable development goals, monitoring and making progress, new economic opportunities and new jobs, and competing in a digital worldwide economy, and efficient allocation of resources. But there's still the same risks that we've been speaking about for years now, right? Like how to get more inclusion, and particularly in developing country contexts, how to lessen the gaps in inequalities and inclusion that can happen when some people are digitally represented or participating and others aren't. Discrimination in algorithms pre-trained on foreign data, privacy risks and security risks, potential for job automation, and the future of work. Many countries are interested in how to prepare their workforce for the digital economy. Lack of transparency, explainability in deep learning models, and potentially loss of human autonomy in algorithmic decision-making as more and more systems get scaled in public sector and private sector. So we're trying to balance these in ways that help, and I'm sure you are if you're from the technical community as well, that help your customers and your users, that help their citizens, that help the economy grow while not compromising certain values. So how might we approach a national AI strategy? So there are 60 or so plus national AI strategies now. They started, Canada was an early developer, and actually was in Toronto when I spoke at a rework 4 years ago, and that was quite nascent and exciting. But now there are a lot more countries with national AI strategies, and we're trying to help close that gap so that it's not just European and more advanced economies that have the capacity and the trajectory. But this is, of course, starting with the policy and stakeholder mapping in the country, collective intelligence workshops and validation workshops, interviews. We start with speaking with startups, corporates, public sector institutions, academia that are interested in AI adoption, and we want to understand what are their practical challenges and barriers in getting started with AI. Is it on the talent side? Is it data availability? Is it access to foreign cloud computing, which can sometimes be a problem if data privacy regulation prevents access to American competitive cloud, like AWS, for example. And then that will lead to a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, for the AI ecosystem that really serves as a diagnostic for the country. And then from there, we'll support with capacity building webinars or curricula and training, or recommend this to the countries to make sure that policymakers or leaders within companies are able to implement. Countries are often sometimes interested in AI ethical guidelines as well, and we'll speak about that. They're often interested in what others are doing, so we can benchmark and do case examples for other countries, although the relevance can always be in question, and then an implementation plan to make sure that the policy is implemented in an effective manner. So a national AI policy framework that we develop might look something like this. It can start with some enabling capabilities, like in human capital, digital infrastructure and compute, and data access. So that could include things like, here's guidance for collecting data in a standard format across sectors so that you can share in a way that preserves privacy and that is secure. Targeting AI adoption in the public sector and in the private sector with some key use cases identified. And then AI ethical guidelines or data protection policy and regulation and others. And then we might identify some key sectors for the country. This could be based on the economy needs or low-hanging fruit, like maybe telecom or other sector already has a lot of data available and or they have an institution that has data scientists and is ready to go. But it could include healthcare, banking, manufacturing, transportation, education, agriculture, where the country really sees exciting opportunities to apply AI for efficiency and productivity gains, maybe by identifying some use cases like the ones I showed in healthcare before. So then, countries will often also have AI ethical guidelines. Maybe your companies do as well. But what example do they look to learn from others? Sometimes they'll look at the OECD AI principles, which the Future Society has participated in developing as well, or the UNESCO AI ethical guidelines, or they'll look at what's coming out of the EU, like EU high-level expert group, and others. But if a country is, that's not leading in AI and that's not already involved in these platforms, is thinking about how to guide their developers and their tech scene to be ethical and responsible, which of those guidelines do they look to, and how relevant is it for their context, and how do they even choose or know? Policymakers everywhere are often lack the capacity to make such complex decisions and to implement them. So it's a really important question, but these are often some of the principles. And then the question is their relevance locally. For example, if a country might have a preference for innovation to save lives, for example, by improving agriculture or health outcomes, how do they make some of these trade-offs? So the last two slides here are getting to some of our findings. And this is super high level, but obviously our recommendations might include things like expanding digital infrastructure and digital literacy in the education system and inclusion to make sure that technology benefits everyone equally so that everyone's data is represented. If only some people are online, they're not, the mobile applications aren't collecting representative data. And as mentioned, that could be on gender lines, rural, urban, education lines in some countries. Digital infrastructure penetration isn't equal, affordability of iPhones, et cetera. Data privacy and consumer protection policies, including data sharing guidelines by sector, but these need to balance data privacy with the need for more data, so we can sometimes see this tension in the innovation opportunities and managing risks. Training and internships to get more practical experience. For example, Carnegie Mellon University Africa, which is based in Kigali, Rwanda, their Industry Innovation Lab, which seeks to pair students with practical experience. And then another really important question is, what are the governance frameworks for public-private partnerships or foreign direct investment with foreign technology companies like Amazon or Microsoft to bring high-performance computing and data centers to a region and with investment? But how to do that in a way that builds local capabilities and skills and that preserves data privacy, security, and the local values. And last slide here. So we don't have all the answers because AI policy is quite new in the sense that national AI strategies are just been cropping up in the last few years. Often development organizations and governments want to know what are the best practices, what's the evidence base, and it's really not there. So they're looking at what other countries are doing and case examples. But what would be great is to do some of this more fundamental research. So if any of you would like to partner on that, we would love to as well. So open questions might be, what's the relevance of international ethical principles, like from the OECD in development contexts? What are some approaches to grow representation of the global south in these, quote, global governance of AI platforms, like Global Partnership on AI or OECD, UNESCO? What are some KPIs for an AI economy? How can a country situate itself and know its level of AI readiness and effectiveness and measure outcomes, often when local statistical capacity is low? What are the roles among international development organizations, companies, American and big tech companies, governments, nonprofits, civil society, locally and international, in helping to set up and support responsible AI in developing country contexts? How to identify some of these priority use cases in the transport or healthcare sector and do the empirical analysis to say, if you do X amount of investment, we can grow agriculture by X amount. And lastly, how to conduct impact assessments and implementation strategies for AI, again, when the empirical evidence can often be lacking. So we would love to partner on these or some of our other projects with you. And yeah, I'm really excited to be sharing this exciting work stream. So don't hesitate to get in touch. And as I mentioned, the Future Society also works on a lot of different areas. We have a course now, MOOC, Massive Open Online Course on AI and the Rule of Law for judges and judicial operators, for example. And that's in partnership with UNESCO and the National Judicial College in the US and others, as well as a lot of other exciting activities. So that's us, and I look forward to meeting you. Thank you.